feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Movie Podcast. I am one of your hosts, or juror number one, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside juror number two, Eric Marchin.
My grand juror.
Yes, today we are reviewing, if you didn't already get by that horrible intro by the both of us, we are reviewing Clint Eastwood's Juror number 2. Eric, how are you doing?
He's guilty, Matt. He's guilty
Whoa.
of all charges.
Is that spoilers? Who knows? Yeah, this is one that we weren't originally going to review because it kind of screened very last minute for press here in Toronto. It's gotten a very weird, super limited release. That's almost why I think we should review it, because it only played 50 cinemas worldwide, I believe, or North America.
That's right, Matt. It's the movie David Zaslav doesn't want you to see.
So played in 50 cinemas, was supposed to only be for 1 week. They did extend that about 2 weeks. They did extend it by 1 week.
2 weeks? Juror number 2.
Holy shit. And it is currently, I think, still playing, or did it end on Friday? No, this is the second week, right? Yeah, that we're in right now. So it's still playing. Toronto at the Varsity Cinemas is one of those 50 cinemas that it's playing at, and then it will be put onto Max in a few weeks, I believe. So
which means it'll probably come to Crave in Canada.
Yes, exactly. So weird release strategy. So going into that, I was like, oh, this must be an absolute train wreck, right? Because Clint Eastwood, forget the man, politics, all that kind of shit. As a filmmaker, a very up and down, hit or miss kind of filmmaker, right? The odd banger, the odd time you get something where you're like, oh, that's really fucking good. But then for every really good one, you kind of get maybe one that's okay, and then one that's really bad.
And then one is Jersey Boys.
And then everything in between, including Jersey Boys. Or you get some things that do super well, like American Sniper, that we thought was awful. Something like Sully, that's very okay. It's all over the place, his filmography. But so going into this and that release strategy, I'm like, oh, it must be horrible, right? Well, everyone, we're about to blow your minds.
Well, the verdict's in.
Eric and I, unanimous juror decision, both really, really liked this movie, which was quite the shock. So that's kind of why we're here and really kind of wanted to talk about it.
And also, I mean, this is, you already mentioned, Clint Eastwood's 94. This very well could be his last film. And I think even that is strange that Warner Brothers is not giving this a more kind of robust release when it comes to singing the praises of a guy that's worked at that studio for over 50 years and has brought them, I think, his best movie of his career, which is Unforgiven. But there's a lot of great stuff that he has directed. Like Pale Rider, I think, is one of the most underrated movies of what he's done. And yeah, he can surprise you in ways where like material that maybe you don't know if he can pull off, like something like Mystic River with
I like
Dennis
Mystic
Lehane's
River a lot.
novel, and that kind of sparked Lehane as a go-to author for filmmakers like Ben Affleck with Gone Baby Gone and Martin Scorsese with Shutter Island. So like you have those weird moments where he does those films, and then he also has movies for himself. Like, he's a big jazz guy, and he made the film about Bird and had Forrest Whitaker in that movie, and that's a really solid little film that no one talks about, but something I believe he's really proud of as a director. And he's always been a meat and potato type filmmaker where his days or schedules are known to be get everything done before lunch and do it in 1 or 2 takes. And sometimes that can be a detriment to actors, because there are some that feel like they need more time or a few more scenes, and it's like, well, you better bring the best you have in those first 2 takes, because he's going to use them. And if you're not sure of yourself or feel, self-conscious in any way, you're going to, see that on the screen. And I think you have seen that, especially in the late period Eastwood movies. I think of someone like Dwight Yoakam in Cry Macho, who's kind of awful in that. And I like Dwight Yoakam. I thought Dwight Yoakam, you're talking about like someone who does the opposite. Dwight Yoakam is amazing in David Fincher's Panic Room. So, like you look at actors like that, or even Diane Wiest in The Mule, which is a little bit of a performance that kind of feels, bordering on almost laughably bad. Like it's all depending on the rhythm as well, and like if you're in sync with him as an actor, and so there's that allure as well, I think, of like that style of filmmaking. His movies also tend to have a very flat kind of gray look to them. Like the Tom Stern era of cinematography specifically really defined that, like Warner Brothers, it's almost like a digital sheen in a way, or like a filter that's like everything is very like gray or silvery in a way, like even like Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima. With Juror number 2, it's not as bad. Like it kind of is like nice and warm looking and kind of reflects sort of, the Southwest and where the characters are in this story is. So it has a little bit more of like a brightness to it, even though there are darker elements within the flashbacks. But the funniest thing about this whole movie, and maybe there is a point to Jonathan Abrams' script that he's working from, is that it's an indictment of the American legal system in terms of how jurors are selected, or what that vetting process is. Because realistically, in just, picking the jury, it feels like there are some major oversights that would not only be unethical on the part of the lawyers in charge of choosing who's on this juror, in terms of like, J.K. Simmons' character being a retired cop. You have a guy that has a prejudice towards a gang that the
because at
the person on trial is actually was once associated with. And so
so many conflicts of interest or bias and stuff like that, which I think, to jump in, I think adds to your point of, kind of a over the top critical analysis of the judicial system in the United States. But it also just, the movie, the more ridiculous it gets. I think it's such a fun concept, right? Of like an ethical dilemma of someone who is on a jury, and these aren't spoilers because these are in the trailer. Someone who is part of a jury, and they're the one who should be going up on trial because they're the one who committed the crime, and whether you're a good person and you didn't
he's
realize
a good man.
Which, I think it's a really fun ethical dilemma, and the movie, I think you said meat and potatoes, just very straightforward, just this, basically,
it's like an episode of Law and Order, but in
like
film form,
courtroom
right?
drama, that courtroom thriller, that's played in the sense, we just reviewed Blitz, and we saw this on the same day as Steve McQueen's Blitz. And, in Blitz, it's also the escalation of how many ridiculous things happen in that movie. You end up kind of rolling your eyes or laughing at it in a way that doesn't seem like you're laughing sort of at the movie more so than with it. And this movie, I think, you're kind of laughing at it and with it as it goes on. Like, I do think a lot of it is intentional, especially, but like it gets very silly, and everyone is just the dumbest human being possible.
Everyone's incompetent, incompetent.
Yeah. And it makes for like a really fun courtroom drama. Like, and it's got some, interesting things to say. I think the script is actually kind of very clever and fun. And I like that, how many ridiculous biases that get thrown by the jury, and how many ridiculous plot elements there are of throughout, where you're kind of laughing while watching it. But then it just makes for a highly entertaining movie, which is what I wasn't expecting. And Yeah, throughout the entire thing, I was just kind of completely engaged from the initial premise thrown at you, and it got to where, where I thought the movie was going to be very quickly, so I was wondering, like, what the rest of it would be and how it plays out. I thought of this guy trying to figure out, like, should he, he wants to make sure that this guy doesn't go to jail because he didn't do it, but he is the one who he doesn't also want people to know that he did it, and I just think it makes for a really kind of fun interaction between all the jurors, and just makes for kind of a really entertaining courtroom drama.
Yeah, and a morality tale as well
Yeah.
as a play, and like it's nowhere near as good as Sidney Lumet's 12 Angry Men. It just
No,
it
of
won't
course
be, it
not.
won't
But
be, or nor is it like at times like it's also trying to do the Rashomon thing where you have the evidence being presented, some of which is video clips or testimony, and how whether it's from the witness or it's from recorded material will go into the scene, but then we'll also see it from Nicholas Hoult, who plays the titular juror number 2, who's this recovering alcoholic who's kind of got his life back on track. He's starting a family with Zoey Deutch. They're expecting their first child. He wants to get out of jury duty initially because no one wants to be on jury duty really, and that's also something that I think is a commentary in this movie where it's like they would all want to be unanimous in finding somebody guilty just simply not to be there anymore. It's like, okay, well, we've been presented with enough information instead of even like simply
I just want to go home,
debating
right?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so like that is also an interesting kind of commentary on it, but there is the aspect that you already brought up where like Toni Collette, who is the lead prosecutor, and is running for DA, and like
Yeah.
her, the way she treats this is basically the Gabriel Basso, who probably a lot of people will know as JD Vance in Hillbilly Elegy, is been accused of murdering his partner, and it was at a bar, and that bar is also where Nicholas Holt's character was, and Hoult believes when he was driving home that he hit a deer that previous year, and so then he goes to his AA meeting and gets advice from Kiefer Sutherland, who's running the AA meeting, but also happens to be a lawyer.
His lawyer.
And it's so convenient and contrived in that way, but it kind of works as, like, as you were mentioning, a procedural, but almost like it has melodramatic kind of tendencies in it as well, and it's playing up as almost being superficial in the exchanges between characters when it comes to like the moral issues, or just like in terms of how you're trying to bring how you're trying to convert somebody over to your side of thinking in terms of creating alliances within this small room for debate. And like even that I think is interesting. J.K. Simmons I think is the best in terms of the actors and performances, and
Who's
kind of
always
brings
great, but
he brings a gravitas to it all, and a sincerity, and distinguishes it, and like even though it's a smaller role, like it kind of feels nice that he's in a Clint Eastwood movie. So there's that, like everybody is good, like in terms of the performances they're
So what we're
giving.
talking about, when you only get a couple takes, I'm kind of surprised there's at no point I go, oof, that was a bad delivery or anything. Like everyone's locked in. Like I think everyone's pretty good.
Everyone is here to stand trial, and the verdict on the acting is that the characters themselves are horrible.
Yeah, everyone is incompetent, as you mentioned.
But the performances are well done, and everybody brings something to the table. And I like that Clint Eastwood's also still working with actors that maybe are lesser known or character based, and not necessarily like, it's like you could have filled that jury room with those 12
with
jurors
A-list
with
actors,
right?
right?
And like with Nicholas Hoult and J.K. Simmons kind of being the two kind of bigger names in that room, and then you have Chris Messina and Toni Collette as the lawyers, but there are a lot of character actors here, and up and comers, and it's like for
Cedric
his
Yarborough, like I thought was an interesting choice too, a guy who's done a lot of comedy and stuff like that. And, so you do have like some lesser known people, which I think is I agree with you, kind of fun.
Yeah, and especially because it is his last, maybe it could be his last movie, allegedly. It feels like, oh, he could have really packed this with like the last, 5 actors to win supporting awards at Oscars, like that kind of thing.
Or
but
even what we were joking about before the movie of making, Super Smash Brothers, but with only Clint Eastwood characters. But you could just fill it up with other actors that have been in Eastwood movies if he really wanted this to be like, this is my last film or something. But it's almost treated as just, oh, it's another movie I made. and he fires on such a, of course we said he's inconsistent when it comes to quality, but he fires at his age, such a consistent clip when it comes to, like just making movies. Like it seems like every other year we get a new Eastwood movie, even at his age. It's kind of wild. And I saw someone joke about being like, this might be the best thing a 94-year-old has ever made, like in anything. Because and
it's definitely like he had help too, obviously, because every filmmaker does. Like it's not just simply all on him, but in terms of, we're talking about competency or, the lucidness of it. Like if you're just watching this and not knowing how old Clint Eastwood is, you would be like, oh, this is a perfectly well-made entertainment. And there's nothing like inconsistent or, feels like it was made by somebody that doesn't know what they're doing or it isn't there. Like it's very much like Eastwood making something that he's very good at doing and he's comfortable in it. And it's very relaxed in terms of letting the story speak for itself. And the story has enough there going on to be entertaining. And I think, Clint Eastwood and obviously like someone like Ridley Scott, who we'll probably talk a lot with Gladiator too, he's 87. I think that those guys are only as good as the scripts they're working from, because they're both filmmakers that don't write their own material. They help kind of develop and cherry pick from what's available script wise. So even someone like David Fincher. So with that in mind, like, if you have something like this that maybe has a little bit more to it, or Unforgiven, which actually had a lot to say about, that was the definitive Western for him and kind of closing the book on the genre in the way that Scorsese was doing with The Irishman, right? Like in terms of saying like all you need to
I've
say
done so much of this and this is going to be my final kind of
this is my definitive thought on this genre and what I have to contribute to it and what it means now. And like, when you go back, you can always look at that and, find meaning in it. And with that script and with that material, and also Eastwood just being a huge part of, Western iconography, I think that all those things came together in a way that was perfect and like made the perfect movie. And so when you look at something like Jersey Boys, which was him just coming on to do a job, after like Jon Favreau left and things like that, that just feels like, okay, this is, this is more for like, oh, the studio's given me so much, so I'll come and do this. I don't think Clint Eastwood necessarily has the biggest has an affinity for Frankie Valli.
He is such a weird choice for that movie, but
it is. But that happens sometimes with directors, though, right? Like that, there's always that weird like outlier in a career. Like everybody with Robert Altman always said that Popeye was that strange movie that kind of like just happened, because like it was right after Superman, and so people were looking to make comic books and cartoon characters into live action films and to kind of sort of capitalize on that trend or that success. So there always is those kind of movies where like I think the movie musical, like it was right before La La Land, but Jersey Boys the play was so popular at that point that Warner Brothers wanted to make it. And they just went through one filmmaker after another. And it is such a terrible film. It is awful.
Never saw it. When you mentioned it the other day, I could have
sworn it came out the same year as American Sniper.
I know. And I could have sworn Jersey Boys came out in like 2004. That's what I thought. And then you're like, no, that came out the same year as American Sniper. And I'm like, oh, and speaking of American Sniper, no,
rubber baby
dolls in this movie.
There's a real baby in this.
there is a real baby. We can confirm that. So someone did see American Sniper and go, Clint, we can't do that again. We cannot. I know.
Although movie went on to get nominated for Best Picture, and Cooper got a Best Actor nomination for holding that rubber baby.
That gives me acid reflux. That and the Mel Gibson war movie that I hated. Hacksaw Ridge. Like both of American Sniper and Hacksaw Ridge give me acid reflux just thinking of them.
It's for those movies are for the conservative crowds when it comes to like the Oscar type movies. But there are some of those films that I think we do like Hell or High Water is now kind of considered to be like a conservative type movie for, you know, the awards voter that doesn't want anything experimental or weird or what they consider avant-garde.
Oh, don't get me wrong. Those movies can hit sometimes. It's just
definitely
those two that I just referenced. I can't.
But Eastwood as well is such an interesting personality in terms of what he means to some film critics, because I've noticed this as well in the last couple of decades, where you have, and I'm not trying to be mean and name dropping this or bringing people up, but like someone like Richard Brody, where every single film that he reviews from Eastwood, he puts Eastwood in the category of Jean-Luc Godard and Bresson and filmmakers like that are
like the Mount Rushmore of like, oh, you mean experimental
or just and like art house European filmmakers that
like
were
the
doing
American version of that.
Yeah, well, because like the what's it called, the 15 27 15
to Paris 15 17 to Paris
15 like some people were like, oh well, this is kind of like him doing Bresson in a way where, you know, he's working with non-actors because he took the real people in the incident and he wanted to act like, one of his things was he wanted to get the actual terrorists out of prison to play themselves in that scene. And so some people, you know, apply like this grander image of, you know, like, oh, he knows exactly what he's doing and he's really, you know, playing to the craft and the metaphor, and there's so much more to mine there. And it almost weirdly reminds me of how some people react to Trump or like talk about Trump as like, oh, he really knows what he's doing, like he's actually savvy, he's just playing a role, you know. And that as well, where it's like Clint Eastwood, I think like he's a sturdy filmmaker and like he has obviously the years of experience, but I think it also is, again, it's about like the script he's working with and what that has to say, and if there's any extra depth. I think sometimes it's not as intentional as some people give the credit to Eastwood. I think it's just sometimes, oh, you know, like
it's a good script.
It's a good script. It's good performances. Maybe there's something like, you know, you take an actor who's known for a certain thing and play them in this and has something to say there. But the way they describe him with certain film critics, it's almost like he's this like mastermind filmmaker who knows like everything he's doing is intentional, and you're only the smart ones can really pick up on that, you know. And like that I find is a little bit false. You know, I think Juror Number 2 is a really good movie, and I think I know what it's trying to say, but I also think that it says it in a very stilted manner, but I think it works ultimately, you know.
I absolutely 1000% agree. I think you might not have a chance to go see this in a theater, and you probably don't need to see it in a theater, although our screening pretty busy and kind of fun to watch it with a crowd, because I think people did laugh throughout it, and like both at the kind of ridiculous elements, and there are some intentional kind of bits in there that do draw laughter. But I highly recommend when it comes to Max or Crave here in Canada. Like I was at my parents' last night, and it's that dad and mom movie, man. Yeah. Like it's absolutely, I'm going to be like, put on Juror Number 2. You're going to love it. Like it's just very silly and entertaining. And I think is that exact kind of adult drama that Eastwood is good at, and he kind of nails it here, and I was kind of shocked by that. So in both, you know, I think in a genuine way and in kind of like you said, some of it's stilted, some of it's, you know, as incompetent as, the more incompetent everyone is and the more outlandish and silly these situations become, I just wanted, I compared it to Blitz earlier, where in this, I just wanted another ridiculous moment to happen because I was having fun watching it in that way. Where in Blitz, I wanted it to tone down that and kind of be more like serious because I felt like the subject matter deserved that in that movie. Where in here, yes, a horrible thing happens to a young woman, in a hit and run, but um, because it's just a fictional story and it's more of, a scathing kind of portrayal of the judicial system, I just kind of throw every ridiculous thing in there. And I was like fist pumping every time something silly happened. Cause like everyone is just it is the most incompetent group of people you've ever seen in your life. When the jurors, the judge, the two, the future DA, the public defender by Chris Messina, it's just everyone is incompetent.
Well,
and
even the
it
witness,
becomes,
like there's this
yeah.
amazing scene in the film where they have testimony from an eyewitness who saw what
I
was
wish that
happening on
Eastwood
this.
played that role.
I do too. On
Yeah.
this rainy night, and he's about to point, like he's putting out his finger because they ask, like, do you see this man in the room that you saw that night? And he points his finger, and the finger starts to kind of like move to
Towards
the
Nicholas
juror
Hoult.
box.
Yeah.
In the juror box, and Nicholas Hoult drops his AA coin
just so he can like
bend
so
over
he can like block his face. It's so funny.
And he moves to point over to the person that's on trial, and
JD Vance.
JD Vance. Which maybe, hey, one day he will be on trial. But it is very silly and again almost plays as a joke. And I think like if it went the opposite way we were talking with Blitz, like if juror number 2 started to become serious, I think that's where it would lose me a little bit, because here it is so, it's just so overt in terms of like how it's playing, with characters that are, defined basically by, it's like, oh, J.K. Simmons, I'm an ex-cop, and this kind of seems a little bit weird. And like when he starts investigating, like even he like knows right away, like ultimately, like if he were like, this is where the incompetence comes in, like, he starts looking at the cars. It's like, oh, your car was
it can't be you.
Had to go in for some repairs, but it's like it can't be you. So, and like stuff like that, and you're laughing at it, but it works because it is so silly.
And it's like earnest, right? Like I do think it's earnestness where we're talking that like
Ernest goes to court.
Yeah, yeah. And where what it's trying to say is so overt, to your point, that yes, it is taking itself seriously, but it just has this vibe to it that you kind of don't take it seriously, but then you kind of appreciate what it's saying, but then the way it's saying it, you kind of are laughing at, which makes it entertaining, but then it actually does have something to say. So it's this weird mismatch that just kind of ultimately works and makes for a highly entertaining movie. So highly suggest it when it comes to Max and Crave. We don't have a specific date, but I'd say probably late November, probably.
Yeah, it's supposed to get a Blu-ray release as well in mid 2025.
I did see that,
specified
with that
by
Clint signature.
I
can't
the
imagine the 94-year-old Clint Eastwood sitting in a room and making sure the Blu-ray is up to specifications. But maybe I'm wrong.
The collector's sets of a lot of his movies
I have
at
one of
Warner
them,
Brothers. Yeah, like I mean, there's a lot of effort there to kind of keep people, interested in his work, like make it accessible for people to find and
to watch. I maybe agree with you on the experimental filmmaker kind of thing, maybe not being accurate, but he is one of the most iconic probably people ever to come out of Hollywood, probably.
Oh, definitely. And one of the longevity, like obviously, like we keep saying he's 94, but to have the career that he has had
as an actor and now
to start as a day player and then become a TV star and then become, a movie star, but a movie star in Italy first, like the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood kind of thing, right? Because you had people like Burt Reynolds and Eastwood after their kind of television careers were over, redefining themselves in Italy, and then those successes coming back to the US to become even bigger movie stars. And then Eastwood, his first movie's a horror film that he directed, Play Misty for Me, and then from then on out, he's directing films, and obviously he is taking inspiration from the Don Siegels and Sergio Leone's and people like that, but his style is very refined, relaxed, kind of almost leisurely in how he sort of unfolds those stories, but he is very much the kind of like steak eater director of American cinema, where like the movies that he makes in the 70s into, I would say, like around the time of Unforgiven, maybe with the exception of Bird, all feel like, oh, this is him playing really to his strengths. He's making these films that are genre tinged, whether they be westerns, horror movies, action films, but then he becomes a little bit more versatile in experimenting with something like I said, with Mystic River, but then also Flags of Our Fathers, Letters from Iwo Jima, and doing those two movies from the two different perspectives, or Changeling. And it does feel like, oh, he's kind of doing the Ridley Scott thing, where like I think Ridley Scott would have been an amazing director in the 1940s, where he would, you send Ridley Scott to direct this kind of movie this week, and then you send him to the different, you send him from the MGM lot to the Warner Brothers lot. And it's the same thing with Eastwood. Like, I think Eastwood, if he were a director in that time period, he would have been versatile and like, oh, we're going to make you direct a crime film this week. Oh, and then next week we're sending you over to Universal to direct, some sort of Western. And that's the thing I actually really like about him as a director, where even the misses, I think, are kind of interesting, but the misses are still misses.
No, totally. Like, I mean, again, at least later, and I Richard Jewell's the only one that I think I kind of missed over the last.
And it's not bad
decade and stuff, and I've heard that too. But like, I have fond memories of seeing Cry Macho and The Mule with you, and and
The Mule in particular.
Again, Sully, a very okay movie, but enjoyed watching that in IMAX. And I do think that if this is the last thing we get from one of the most iconic people, working in Hollywood, I think it's a good way to go, but we could be wrong.
To ride off in the sunset.
Yeah, he could be 97 and we'll see another movie in 2027 or whatever.
Well, he gets them made so quickly, right? Yeah, where like Clint Eastwood and Ridley Scott are these guys that gloat about being under budget and on time,
efficient.
And that can sometimes be to the film's detriment. But at the same time, it can work. I think with this it does work. With Gladiator 2, when we talk about that, I have a different opinion on. I think it's also just because Gladiator 2 is such a big movie, and I think like if you rush something like that, you can kind of see the effects of it on screen. But with Juror number 2, like, it's not a big movie in the sense of like there's not a lot of moving parts. It's performance based. It's there's good production design,
and those are the kind of movies he probably should be doing at this point, right? And that's why I think this ultimately works. Thank you all for listening. We really do appreciate it. We also just put up a review for Steve McQueen's Blitz, which was the double feature we did that day, so that's why we're kind of putting these two reviews out, these two opposing reviews, and probably had the opposite opinions on both movies than what we expected. So please go check out that review for Blitz. Eric also has some interviews up right now for Bird and Anora, which we would love for you guys to go check out. And we do have a big beefy podcast on the Windsor International Film Festival, where Eric and I go over our whole experience at a kind of more local, low-key film festival, where we reviewed Pablo Larraín's Maria, as well as a bunch of other films. So go check that out as well. We will be back soon for some bigger reviews. I think we only have a couple big movies left this year. Red
One.
Kraven the Hunter, Red One. But I don't know if we're going to be reviewing Red One. But we will be reviewing Wicked and
Kraven the Hunter.
So Stay tuned for those. We'll be updating kind of YouTube and Letterboxd before the new year. So those should be up to date, but we'd really appreciate if you go over follow us on Letterboxd, which is Untitled_movies. Myself at Matt Rohrbeck on all social media, Eric at EM6211. Go check out all of Eric's reviews over on rogerstv.com/cinemascene. And that's about it. Until next time.
He's a good man, but he was also About a Boy, which starred Nicholas Hoult and Toni Collette back in the day. So it comes full circle, everyone.
Bye, everybody.